Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
And I want to thank my good friend and one of my classmates from my days down at West Virginia Institute of Technology, Brother Marcus Wilkes. Marcus hasn't changed very much since then. I used to have a big afro about this big, but I always say that hair is overrated. Because everything I should be doing, I can still do. And if I can't do it, then I shouldn't be doing it. But I'm delighted to be here because it doesn't take much to get me excited about coming to what I call in Charleston, the high country. And the people that know me, I will always refer to this as the high country because we're south geographically, we're elevated. We're much higher than Charleston, so I can get that panoramic view, that vista over the mountaintops. I think I was made to live up high, not down low. So I struggle sometimes being down in that valley like the mountains are indeed closing in upon me. But I'm just grateful to be here. As a matter of fact, I'm just grateful to be anywhere. We've had this major crisis on the west side of Charleston. I have not had heat in my house for a month. I still don't have heat. I'm one of the people that don't have heat. The gas that got into the water lines ruined, or the water that got into the gas line, whichever way it was. We'll see who accepts responsibility, but it ruined my furnace, it ruined my hot water tank, it ruined my cooking stove, not that I can cook. But they did bring me a new hot water tank, so I'm grateful. I got hot water, so I'm not complaining. And I always tell people, it's not so bad. This land isn't so bad if you know where you're going. This land isn't so bad. So I'm grateful to be here, and I want to commend those of you who are champions for social justice, for economic justice, for fairness, for equity, and for inclusion, because ever there was a time that was needed, it's certainly needed now. And there needs to be strong, strident, independent, courageous voices that are willing to speak truth to power. As the great George Orwell is quote have saying, is that in the day of mass deception, it's the revolutionary or the truth teller that appears to be the revolutionary. And so we're living in times where there's mass deception and there's need for some authentic truth telling. And I believe that's the only way we can recalibrate our society. And the only thing that powerful, insensitive, unfair, unjust, unreasonable, the only thing that they fear is the truth. Amen. Because the truth is the only thing that can expose them in their insidious beliefs and practices and policies. And so as a preacher of the gospel of Jesus Christ for some 40 years of my life is given to trying to be a truth teller, whether I'm behind the pulpit or whether I'm on the street corner, just to speak the truth and nothing but the truth, so help me God. So tonight for about 30 minutes, I want to talk a little bit about what I believe to be the need and the time for a fierce sense, the urgency of now for economic justice, fairness, and equity in the state of West Virginia. And I'm borrowing from that phrase that Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King coined some many years ago when he talked about this fierce sense of the urgency of now. It was not a time for gradualism. It wasn't a time for let's be relaxed and let's not be strident or let's not be bold and regal and courageous, but the wheels of inevitability, King would say. Some think that the wheels of inevitability will bring in justice, but it just simply doesn't happen that way. So for the next few minutes, I want to give you a 25-year panoramic overview of my efforts to try to push the envelope in Kanawha County with the Kanawha County Legislature toward justice and fairness and equity. And I want to do it in the context of what is happening now with West Virginia State University. And I want to show you the nexus between the unfair, unjust, unequal funding of West Virginia State University and how that dovetails as what the state of West Virginia at the legislature and the gubernatorial level have been doing for many of years to African American people and to low income, low wealth Caucasians who don't always realize that we really are in the same boat and with the same type of challenges. In 1862, during the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln and a legislator from Vermont, Morrell, they introduced legislation, the Morrell Act, which allowed for the creation of land grant institutions. And there were millions of acres of land, or thousands of acres of land were given to states for them to establish these land grant institutions that became the pillar of economic development, education for these states. And then in 1891, the federal government said to the states, well, you are obligated to educate your Negro citizens. And even though Plessy versus Ferguson had said separate can be equal, he said you have one or two choices. You can integrate these colleges or you can build separate colleges. So most of the states in the South chose to build segregated colleges. And so in 1891, the people of West Virginia established the West Virginia Colored Institute. It's what it was called, an Institute of West Virginia. And it was primary teacher college to prepare individuals to be teachers at the elementary, junior high, and the high school level. It later became West Virginia State College. But the federal government said to the states, if you're going to create these separate universities, then they have to be funded equally on a per pupil basis. So how are you funding your Caucasian land grant institutions? You have to fund your Negro land grant institution with the same formula. That's federal law from 1891. So if you fast forward from 1891 to the landmark historic 1954 Supreme Court decision, Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas, when the United States Supreme Court ruled that the segregation of public schools in America was unconstitutional. And the Supreme Court's ruling said that states should move with all deliberate speed to desegregate the public schools. West Virginia became somewhat of a model in some parts of the state for the whole country. Governor Marlin, in my opinion, Bill Marlin, one of the most important governors in the history of West Virginia, maybe the most brilliant, the most mistreated, the most misunderstood, but a man who had a commitment to justice. He says, we're going to move with all deliberate speed. And he strongly encouraged all the counties to start desegregating schools, and they started to do that. As a matter of fact, Kanawha County was leading the charge. And West Virginia State University became a model. It was referred to as the laboratory of human relationships. It desegregated without incident. While George Washington was standing, George Wallace was standing in the door of the University of Alabama saying, no Negroes will come in here. And while Arkansas was basically doing the same thing, and all over the South, and in some parts of the states at the public school level, they shut schools down. In parts of Virginia, in parts of Arkansas, in parts of Louisiana, and kids didn't go to school for many years, and some black children never went back to school as a result of that. A lot of these private academies was established at that time, the quote unquote Christian academies, as a way of maintaining segregated education. But West Virginia State University desegregated. And they were rewarded by the state of West Virginia that they took away their land grant status in 1957, transferred it to Morgantown and West Virginia University, the only other land grant institution in the state. And so between 1957 and 1991, all the money that should have been coming to West Virginia State University as a land grant institution was going to Morgantown. There was a delegation, Mr. Wesley Linton was one of the champions that was appealing to the state to re-bestow upon West Virginia State its land grant status, and their family was able to get that done in 1991. But the federal government was a little bit reluctant. They said, why did the state lift it in the first place? So it wasn't until 2001 when the federal government bestowed back on West Virginia State its land grant status, making it eligible to receive land grant monies from the federal government. So the federal government has a formula that the states have to put up a certain amount of money to support its land grant institutions, and then the federal government will match that. Well, the state of West Virginia was very reluctant to provide West Virginia State University with its land grant match, while they were giving West Virginia University more than what was required. And this went on for years. A good friend of mine, Pastor David Feist, and I, we worked very diligently in 2001 and worked with a couple of legislators, one a Democrat and one Republican, and we got state their land grant match in 2001. I think it was $1.4 million which the federal government matched. What we didn't know, that's the only year they got it, into 2019. We did not know that the state of West Virginia was not providing them with the match. The people at West Virginia State University, very well educated, very capable people, really wanted to do the right thing, but I think they were intimidated and fearful if they were to protest too loudly. If they would express in a demonstrative way their displeasure that they were not being properly funded, that they might be penalized even more, so they were silent. So it wasn't until 2019, I believe, when the then president, Anthony Jenkins, was able to get the state of West Virginia to provide West Virginia State with its full land grant match for that year of $2.9 million. Now, why am I sharing all of that with you? I'm sharing that with you because you probably are aware that back in September, 2 United States secretaries, Secretary Thomas Vilsack, the Secretary of the Department of Agriculture, and Secretary Dr. Miguel Cardona, Secretary of Education, they sent a letter to 16 governors in the United States of America, 16 governors whose states have land grant institutions. And in the letter, they outlined to those governors the fact that they had been underfunding their land grant institutions for over 34 years. They only went back 34 years because if they went back farther than that, I think it would have bankrupted some of the states. For example, Tennessee State University in Nashville has been underfunded by the state of Tennessee by the tune of $2.2 billion over the last 34 years. And I have all 16 letters. They sent a letter to our Honorable Governor, Jim Justice, advising him that the state of West Virginia had underfunded West Virginia State University by the sum of $852,660,000 in change over the last 34 years. To that, our governor responded, well, we're going to help that great university moving forward, but we're not too concerned about talking about this $853 million that we owe. Roger Hanshaw, arguably one of the most educated legislators in the history of the state of West Virginia, and maybe the most skilled and gifted parliamentarian. It's a major show to watch him wheel and deal in the legislature. PhD guy, very smart. The House Speaker said, well, we're not going to look at paying them any back money. We'll try to help them moving forward. One of the most intriguing characters in the Western State, legislators in the Western State Legislature is Senator Craig Blair. And Senator Craig Blair responded by saying, I don't care what a Biden Secretary of Education or Agriculture have to say, it means nothing to me. That's what our elected officials have said in response to these letters from these two cabinet level secretaries. So I believe this is one of the most important issues that we face in the state for working people, for low-income people, low-wealth people, for African Americans, and for Caucasians, particularly in central and in southern West Virginia. And I'm going to explain to you why I believe that to be the case. As a land grant institution, higher education, Western State University has a responsibility not to merely to provide higher education opportunities at the four-year college level and some master's degrees, but as a land grant institution, they have an obligation to the people that live on the land. They're supposed to be working to try to improve education, workforce development, economic development, community development to help improve the quality of life for the people that live on the land. So for the last 34 years, and I argue many more years than that, they've been handcuffed. They've been crippled. Their capacity has been limited because they have not had the resources, and they have been cash strapped for many, many years. And anyone associated with Western State University, they know that. If you just tangentially know how they've struggled over the years. And so this has caused tremendous injury to the university in terms of its inability to provide certain course offerings, probably to attract and to retain highest quality professors and faculty because they leave, because they can make money in other places. And they've had continuing to raise tuitions, and therefore the students have paid more to get a college education. They've been injured. But I would argue the major injury has really happened to the people. The people throughout southern West Virginia, people in McDowell County, in Logan County, in Boone County, in Jackson County, Lincoln County, these places that are really distressed, Wyoming County, all of these places are part of Western State University's land grant footprint. There are only two, Western University and Western State University. So the other 8 four-year college and university, they don't have land grant status. So they do not have the obligation to the community that West Virginia State University and that West Virginia University have. Are you tracking with me? Yeah. So the people have been severely injured. And I've been trying to say as politely, as delicately, as professionally as I possibly can, that these colleges and universities do not belong to the president, the faculty, and the board of governors, or even the students only. They belong to us. They belong to the people. These are public universities, and they belong to the people, and there should be some accountability to the people. And meeting the needs of the people should be a part of their agenda, particularly the 2 land grant institutions. Now let me correct something here that's a misnomer. When people talk about West Virginia State University, they talk about this 1891 land grant college/university, and that's all true. They are historically black college and university, but they are presently predominantly a Caucasian college and university. As quiet as it's kept, the dramatic transformation that's happened at West Virginia State University over the years, that now the student body is right at 80% Caucasian. The faculty and the staff is about 90% Caucasian. And most people do not realize that. This is a predominantly Caucasian college and university. And the communities surrounding West Virginia State University, all these counties that they are charged to serve, are also predominantly Caucasian. And the 300,000 plus poor people in the state of West Virginia, give or take some, depending on the day that you do the count, right? Well over 270,000 of them are low-income, poor white people. So it is white people that have been injured, that have been damaged significantly by West Virginia State University not being funded commensurate with what the federal statute required the state of West Virginia to fund them. You follow? This is a socioeconomic issue. Yes, it has hurt African Americans in the heavily populated African American communities like the west side of Charleston. But I try to tell people, don't let your eyes deceive you in terms of what the media portrays on the big screen. The west side of Charleston is the most densely populated community in West Virginia. Where I live in the west side flat, right? And the west side of Charleston is the most densely populated. We will be the 10th largest city in West Virginia. We were a separate municipality. The west side, we got almost 17,000 people. We'd be the size of Beckley in population and the size of Fairmont. But as quiet as it's kept, black people only make up about 30% of the residents on the west side. It's that we all live together. So when they come and want to show something for the television, they show the public housing where we live in large numbers. They show where I live, the west side flat, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th Avenue. They show Stockton Street. They show Hunt Avenue, Fitzgerald, Florida, and that's where blacks live in high concentration. But most of the poor people on the west side of Charleston are poor white people. If you come down there to visit me, you will see them. Most of the homeless people roaming through the neighborhoods are poor Caucasian people, wreaking havoc for the community and neighborhood in terms of the property that they are destroying. So this is a community that's hard hit, but there are communities all over southern West Virginia and central West Virginia. The need for West Virginia State University to be funded properly, adequately, fairly, equitably, and justly moving forward. But we need this back pay. We need every penny of the $852,600,000 that the state of West Virginia owes. They owe that to West Virginia State University. And when I listen to our honorable governor and the House Speaker and the Senate President, it's discouraging to me and it's disappointing that they can be so dismissive and so disrespectful and talk with such disdain of this prestigious university. Let me let you in on a secret. West Virginia State University is 132 years old. For 132 years, it has been educating students, right? For the first 63 years or so, they were all black. And then for the last, almost 80 or 70 years plus, they've been predominantly Caucasian. And they haven't missed a beat, and they do an incredible and a marvelous job. So someone asked me the question, Reverend Watts, why do you believe that West Virginia State University should be paid this money that the state of West Virginia owe them? I said, you just answered the question. They owe them. That's why they should be paid, because the state of West Virginia owes them. And I said, I never know a situation to where the debtor establish the terms as to how they're going to pay the debt, right? That's not where it works. When I go to the bank, they determine. They want some collateral. They want something against the loan. Do you have any children? You know, what type blood do you have? We can maybe take some of that. They decide the terms of engagements to one another because they're entitled to that money. And secondly, it is an affront to Western State University and to the thousands of people that they're charged to serve, that they can't serve them adequately the way they should be serving them. And I say, so let me ask you a question. Why should the state of West Virginia give Nucor $300 million or $400 million, whatever the number was? Why should it give the battery people up in Weirton 2 or 3 in a minute, whatever the number it was, right? I said, you can make a good argument for them. That's not come out of the private sector, and I'm not totally against welfare. Y'all get that, didn't you? Yeah. I'm not against corporate welfare. I'm not a great advocate of it, but I do understand that we are competing in a market where we have to compete with other states and other countries that have a lot of money, and so you've got to sweeten the pot a bit to attract some of these businesses to come and bring. I get that, but they should not get all the money. But I said, consider this. West Virginia State University is a proven commodity. 132 years have graduated thousands of students that many are employed in this state at this present hour. Others have worked, finished their career and retired and didn't go to Florida. They stayed in West Virginia. These corporations have done nothing but given us a promise. Give us the money and we promise you that we're going to bring these jobs. I said, this school needs to be supported and they need to get all the money, and maybe they make some arrangement. I suggest to give them $256 million this year because they have it. They got $482 million that they stashed away last year with House Bill 2883, the governor's bill, to take the opera money and hide it from the people so they could give it to the private corporations under the auspices of the Economic Development Authority. Fact check me, House Bill 2883. They got $1.7 billion in a budget surplus, and I'm sure that the governor and House Speaker and the Senate President, they got their wish list of how they want to divvy they up. They've got millions that's coming in to the First Foundation. I think they're up to almost $300 million. They say that's going to tap out probably somewhere near $1 billion for the opioid settlement. The money is there. They could cut a check for $256 million. And then making arrangements, other $600 million over the next 10 years. That's simple mathematics. I took arithmetic at Du Bois Elementary School. I can do that calculation. That's $60 million a year, right? Well, we can do that number, and that's what should be done. The last few minutes, I want to show you this nexus so you can just see how unfair, how unjust, how insensitive that the state of West Virginia is. And let me pause right here, because I give nobody a pass. Nobody gets a pass with Reverend Watts. No political party. I'm not a Democrat, I'm too independent. I've decided neither party represents the interests of the 300,000 plus poor people in the state of West Virginia, and I've tried to work with both of them, and I've concluded that neither one of them are willing to do the right thing, the courage, the boldness, the bulldog tenacity necessary to make a difference. So we got to take them all on and call them to count to do the right thing. Okay. But think about this. That at the same time, West Virginia State University was trying to get land grant status and get funding, there was a report that was compiled. And probably the most important public speech I ever made, and sometime I wish I had not have made it. I did not know it would put me in the crosshairs of the powerful people in this state. It was on February the 21st. 2002 at the Universal Unitarian Church. And I talked about the crisis in the African American community. Did anyone care? And I took the 2000 census data, I took reports from the Center for Disease Control, I took reports from the Western Department of Juvenile Justice and Criminal Justice. My friend, the late Carol Charlotte with the Western Foreign Service Committee had just did a report on the disproportionality, the overrepresentation of blacks in the juvenile justice system, and all this data was there. And I kind of put it together and I gave this presentation, whether you look at the achievement gap, lower academic performance, you looked at suspension, you look at disproportionate minority contact with the juvenile justice system, overrepresentation in the adult criminal justice system, poor community populations, health, lower life expectancies, serious health disparities. Long before COVID ever showed up, we knew how bad these health disparities were. And it was all put together, I put in the speech. Unbeknownst to me, it got major coverage in Charleston. Delegate Carrie Webster at the time, who's now Judge Carrie Webster, asked for the notes from my speech. I had no idea what she was going to do with them. She took my notes, she took the notes from a friend of mine, Miss Ramona Taylor Williams, had did a lot of research on African American businesses. She put those in a legislative document, House Concurrent Resolution 76, and it passed in the legislature. And it then got some attention, and then Delegate Webster convened a hearing on July the 15th, 2002. And all of these state agencies were brought in to refute the radical preacher from the West Side, that he doesn't know what he's talking about, right? He doesn't know what he's talking about. So all these state agencies came in, DHR, state police, juvenile justice, adult criminal justice, workforce investment, they all came in and they gave all the report and they corroborated everything that I said. Delegate Webster then took that and she used that in the 2003 legislative session to get the legislature to pass the Select Committee B on Minority Affairs. It was historic, and most of you never heard of it. They had hearings during the legislative interims in 2003. When they completed those hearings, they compiled a report, almost a 200-page report. There were 23 specific findings of fact of challenges facing the African Americans in the area of education, employment, economic development, juvenile and adult criminal justice, housing. And they put this report together with 36 specific recommendations of things that should have been done to address those issues. Now you would think that there'd be a mandate. Now the reason I give nobody a pass, because the 30+ years that the Department of Agriculture Secretary Vilsack is talking about, and the Department of Education Secretary Cardona is talking about, when Western State University was underfunded, of those years, 21 of those years, the Democrats controlled both the House and the Senate. And during that period of time, 4 of the 6 governors were Democrats. And the Republicans have only controlled both houses of the legislature since 2014, the last 9 years. So the Democrats and the Republicans have been equal opportunity in their indifference, in their insensitivity to the plight of African American people in the state, and for the most part to low income, low wealth Caucasian people as well. The facts speak for themselves. So in 2003, this report comes out in December. This is the 20th year, 2 decades since the Select Committee on Minority Affairs report was issued. In 2004, we tried to get then Governor Bob Wise to take seriously doing something with this report, to try to move some things forward. Well, we did get, at the time, Senator Larry Rowe and Senator Brooks McCabe, they introduced a couple bills. One on the Senate Bill 573, Chapter 31 of the Code dealing with the Economic Development Authority to promote economic development in heavily populated minority communities. Never funded, never executed. Another bill around education, it was never executed properly, but they threw some money in the Department of Education, and it basically was a colossal failure of the project. So now, 2005, my friend, Joe Manchin III, becomes governor, and he is a friend of mine. But he was not interested in the Select Committee on Minority Affairs report. And during his tenure as the governor, he did nothing to advance the Select Committee on Minority Affairs report. And so then you come all the way up to around 2011, Manchin has gone, Earl Ray Tomlin, lieutenant governor, becomes the governor during a special election. When he was the Senate president, he had resisted and had refused to support a bill that Rick Thompson and that Cliff Moore had introduced to create the Herbert Henderson Office of Minority Affairs, based on the Select Committee on Minority Affairs report. Earl Ray Tomlin refused to have that bill put on the agenda of the Senate to be considered, even though it had passed the House twice with almost 1 year unanimous vote. Wow. It took Jeff Kessler becoming the Senate president and making a commitment to make that happen, and he had to arm wrestle, literally, Marion Prezioso and John Unger, Democrats who controlled the Senate finance, who stripped all the money out of the bill 1 year, and who was reluctant to pass the bill. Long story short, the bill was finally passed. Several of my colleagues and I, we opposed the Herbert Henderson Office of Minority Affairs. We didn't think it was a good idea. We thought it would become a shield for the governor, a way to deflect from getting his attention to address issues. That's exactly what has happened. The office has absolutely done nothing of any significance to move anything forward in any legitimate way. What does that have to do with Western State University? Everything. During this whole period of time that we're talking about the Select Committee on Minority Affairs report in 2003, Western State University was being denied their funding by the legislature. Western State University is the only institution in the state of West Virginia that has a specific charge to work to address issues affecting African American people. That's a part of its land grant role. So what the state of West Virginia should have done, they should have summoned Western State University and say, here's this Select Committee on Minority Affairs report with its 23 findings of fact, its 36 specific recommendations. We're gonna put you on the point. There's a lot of humming going on here. We're gonna put you on the point, and we're gonna fund you. Go help your people. Go help your people. And don't forget what a godly preacher told me when I was just a young minister. Never forget it. He said, Reverend Watts, in your zeal to help black people who've been beat down and brutalized for 400 years and still are being oppressed, but in your zeal to help them, please promise me one thing. And I said, what that's rare? Promise me that you will not step over a poor white person who need help, trying to get to a black person who may or may not accept what you're trying to do. And they tried to typecast me at the legislature as being a voice for blacks. I'm up here talking about poor people. I work with Rick Wilson and Lyda Shepherd and other groups. We're trying to advance an agenda for poor people, because poor people, black and white, in the state of West Virginia, they just catching hell. Yeah. And they've been catching it for a long time. And if you want to see how badly they've been catching, all you got to do is watch the Mind Wars. And I tell everybody, you're not a true West Virginian until you watch the Mind Wars. You don't realize how brutal the coal operators, the timber barons, and how the government, the state government, the governors and the legislators sided with their oppression of poor people in southern West Virginia, had them in a police state where they had no choice but to take up arms to try to get freedom, literally to try to get freedom. Yeah. And so the problems of southern West Virginia today, they are directly linked to the exploitation of the southern West Virginia coal fields. Yep. By the out-of-state coal financiers and the coal barons, and the leadership of this state allowed our state to be raped and plundered and all the wealth to be extracted and carried out, and they fought Governor Bill Marlin with an organized effort to keep him from getting legislation passed that will impose coal severance taxes. Now think about it, in the 1950s, we've been putting a tax on every ton of coal that came out of southern West Virginia. that we would have money to revitalize that place and re-engineer it and to redesign it and to help the people. And now the people have been left hopeless and without any real hope of things changing, because there's no vision in the Western State Legislature to really do anything about the challenges of Southern West Virginia. And we tried to talk to some of the legislators from Southern West Virginia last year when we were trying to get them to support a plan that the Tuesday Morning Group had put together and had some broad-based support late in the game of the economic justice, fairness, and equity movement. Now listen to this. What we were calling for was for them to take $300 million of the remaining American Rescue Plan Act funds and then allocate those dollars back to counties based on the percentage of poor people they had of West Virginia's total population. And then you create a pool of money at the local level that could be invested strategically in small businesses, incubators, to use housing as a job training employment, an economic development driver, some of the type of things that Dr. Davis has been doing for years. We got some of the poorest housing in the United States of America, and there needs to be major investment in improving housing all across Southern West Virginia. And we had submitted that plan for 3 years. For 3 years, that plan had been submitted, starting with the CARES Act money that came in 2020. And we call it the 20-20-20. Take 20% of the CARES Act dollars and then allocate those monies to counties with poverty rates of 20% or higher in the year 2020. We had to kind of put it together and make it sound kind of cool, right? The governor's office, House Speaker, Senate President, they want to talk to us. They want to respond to us, they want to even meet with us because they don't want a public debate about the plans that we've submitted to them in writing with specific pieces of legislation that's already codified in law that many people don't even know that's there, already there. And I'll just give you two as I close, and it's something you to take a look at. I referenced it earlier in 2004. I talked about Senate Bill 573. It's in chapter 31, I believe, Article 15 of the code that deals with the Economic Development Authority. It calls for the Economic Development Authority to develop a procedure to promote economic development in heavily populated minority communities. It's not just for black people, but you target in these places where there's a high minority population. Never been funded, never been executed, because they say there's no money. But they sent $482 million to the Economic Development Authority. Last year with House Bill 2883, the governor's supplemental appropriation bill. So now there's $482 million in the Economic Authority's account. There's money to fund that piece of legislation. Dr. Davis, you're like this. In 2009, we worked with Delegate Kerry Webster. We drafted a bill, the Neighborhood Housing Economic Stabilization Bill, that was passed into law in 2009, designed to use housing, rehab, maintenance, weatherization, upgrades, and construction as an economic development driver in heavily populated low-income neighborhoods. It's codified in law. Guess where it's housed? Chapter 31, the Economic Development Authority. So now it's housed right in the Economic Development Authority, and now they have money that they could fund those two laws to promote economic development in low-income distressed communities all over the state of West Virginia, with a particular emphasis on Southern West Virginia and on the Southern West Virginia coal fields. So as I conclude, I believe that it's time to have a fierce sense of the urgency of now. I don't know how to surf. I've never even attempted to surf. I'm afraid of the ocean because I almost drowned in the Atlantic Ocean when I was 12 years old. And when I look at it, I get terrified and petrified. I start tasting salt in my mouth when I look at the ocean. Yeah. I was saved, Brother Marcus, by two white surfers. And I'd almost become radicalized. I was almost radicalized by the time I was 13. And I was 13 when I was in New York in '69, the year that Neil Armstrong and those boys landed on the moon. I was 13. That's after the '68 death of Martin Luther King Jr. That's after the riots, 64, 65, 66, 67, the murder of Malcolm X. My sister gave me Malcolm X books I've read. I'd almost become radicalized. I'd almost given up on white people. Where are the good white people? I don't know where they are. But I never forget. It was a hot summer day in July. And my cousin and I were doing something we shouldn't have been doing, out there trying to jump the waves. And here we from the country. I don't remember, we didn't even have a swimming pool. We couldn't swim in the pool over in Oak Hill. We had a little creek up at Rocky Bottom, and I'm out there jumping in the waves in the Atlantic Ocean. And my cousin gets carried out, and he's calling my name. And we were like brothers, and I'd jump in, I'd go out there, and I'd try to save him. And I get right to him, Brother Marcus, right to him, and reached out to him, and something kind of pulled me under.
Wow.
And I didn't know what had happened to me. And now preservation sets in. I look at the shore, it's so far away. And I'm trying to swim to go to the shore, and I'm not budging an inch, not 1 inch. And my cousin is drifting further and further out, and he's calling my name. I had resigned, I'm going to die right here. I had resigned, I was totally exhausted. And I resigned, I was going to die. And I never will forget the thought that came in my mind. This is going to break my mother's heart. She's going to lose another son. My oldest brother got killed when he was 17 years old. I was 9, right here on Hilltop Mountain, going down this mountain. Car stopped in front of me, he swerved to avoid it, went over the embankment, happened to be a big rock down there. He got thrown out of the car. 6 people in the car, no one else had a scratch, and he was killed. And my mother was so protective of me that she didn't want me to do nothing. And my sister said, you can't do him like that. You let the rest of us go to stay with our aunts, so you gotta let him go. So she let me go, and I thought, my mama, his heart is gonna be broken. And literally, I just went in the water, and a white hand grabbed hold of my hand and pulled me up. There's a little girl that had been on the beach, and when I get to heaven, I'm gonna give her a big hug. She had the presence to run down the beach where these guys were surfing. And they came back, and they saved us. And from that day forward, I began to realize I can't give up on all white people, right? They can't all be bad, because these 2 white guys, they could let these 2 Negro boys drown right here in the Atlantic Ocean, and no one would ever thought anything about it. And that's why I'm committed to trying to help to move an agenda that's going to help the least, the last, the left out, the left behind, the forsaken, and the marginalized. They're disproportionately white, Caucasian in the state of West Virginia. And we got to pull together this coalition.
Yes.
And now's the time to do it with a fierce sense of urgency. And if we can get together behind getting West Virginia State funded, and our plan for the funding of West Virginia State is this, that $600 million would go for them to support communities with economic development, job creation, youth development, education. The people have been injured, and now the people need to be helped. This past week, a few weeks ago, I had a great experience. I got to travel to the South. I spent some time in Montgomery, Alabama. I spent some time in New Orleans. I spent some time in New Houston. But the most enriching was in Montgomery, because I walked up to the Montgomery State Capitol. And I didn't realize that Martin Luther King's church was just literally right across the street. I mean, there's a street, there's the Capitol, there's the street, there's Ebenezer. And I said, this was a bad man. He talking all of this smack, and he's standing on a platform right in front of the Alabama State Capitol, the cradle of the Confederacy. He's standing where Jefferson Davis took the oath of office as the first president of the Confederacy, and their king is standing calling for justice and fairness and equity. I said, that is the courage that we need now.
Yeah.
And we need it with a fierce sense of effort, of urgency. And there's the great Brian Stevenson, who wrote the marvelous book, Just Mercy. I got a chance to meet him when I was in Montgomery and to visit his legacy museum. It's incredible. But Brian Stevenson always says, we must not lose hope, because hopelessness is the enemy of justice. And the great Benjamin Mays, now I've got to see if he actually said this. I got a mentor, Dr. Woodrow Berry, who's a retired law professor down at Marshall University. And he's the best read person I know, maybe the smartest person I've ever known. And I got to start fact checking him because he tells me, well, this person said that. But he told me something Dr. Benjamin Mays supposedly said. That was Martin Luther King's mentor when he was in Morehouse. He said, Dr. Benjamin Mays says that no man and no woman can be before their time. It's impossible to be before your time. You might be in a time when people are not open and receptive for what you have to say. But you're in your time because sometimes your responsibility, your only obligation that you might be able to get done is to put it down on the record, to say what needs to be said without apology, without flinching, without capitulation, say what needs and get it on the record. And it may be years later when God will raise up somebody else that picks up the record and carry it and move the things forward. And that's all we're simply trying to do, is to put this on the record that West Virginia has been unfair, it's been unjust, it's been insensitive, and it's been unwise in terms of its neglect of poor people that are so desperately needed now to replenish the workforce. They're so desperately needed now to build the families and rebuild our communities. And so we got to put it on the record, and we got to challenge this governor, this House Speaker, and this Senate President with everything that we have. Do the right thing. Fully fund West Virginia State University so that they can fulfill their mission, not only to educate students at the university, but to help these struggling, distressed neighbors and communities. I'm out of my time. I thank you for yours.